When I saw my twin sister, Mia, step off the bus, the first thing I noticed wasn't her hair or the suitcase in her hand. It was the bruises. Dark, angry, purplish streaks bloomed across her forearms and cheeks. She tried to hide them with her coat, her scarf, her hair. Every trick we learned growing up. But I saw them anyway. And in that instant, my stomach fell. Mia. My voice was barely a whisper. I don't think she realized how pale she'd become. She gave a small, forced smile, the kind that barely touches the eyes. Hey, I thought I'd surprise you for the weekend. I wanted to reach out, touch her, shake her, scream at whoever did this. But instead, I froze. The bus station smelled like exhaust and fried food. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh white glow over her bruised skin. Everything about the scene made me feel helpless. Why didn't you call me first? I managed, my voice trembling more than I intended. Mia shrugged, her fingers twisting the handle of her suitcase. I didn't want to bother you. I just needed somewhere to stay. My heart ached. Somewhere to stay. Not a confession, not a plea for help. Just the quiet resignation of someone who's learned to endure. We walked to my car in silence, the crunch of gravel under our feet loud in the empty parking lot. I wanted to ask, who did this? But I knew the answer. Her husband, Jordan. Mia would never admit it outright. At least not yet. Back at my apartment, I helped her inside. She leaned against the doorframe, shivering slightly despite the warm spring evening. I got her a glass of water, her favorite chamomile tea, trying to pretend that talking about anything else might somehow patch the wounds I couldn't reach with words. I had always been the more practical one, Mia the dreamer, but in that moment, I realized how much my heart was tethered to hers. Seeing her like this, broken, fearful, it stirred something inside me I couldn't ignore. Over the next hour, she tried to laugh, made small jokes about the bus ride, about the weather. But every laugh sounded brittle, every smile too sharp around the edges. I caught her flinch when I touched her arm to hand her the tea. And then the tears came. Quiet, trembling, like rain soaking the tips of leaves. I can't do it anymore, she whispered. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I wanted to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I also knew that words were useless against the kind of fear she carried. You don't have to, I said softly, letting the silence stretch between us. Not here. Not anymore. And that's when the plan formed in my mind. Something reckless, something desperate. I didn't say it out loud at first, just let it spin quietly. What if we switched places? What if I went back there, and he had to face me instead? It wasn't bravado. It wasn't vengeance. It was protection. The kind that comes from knowing you're the only person in the world willing to step into the fire for someone you love. A week before Mia arrived, my life was ordinary, warm, and slow. I worked from home as a graphic designer, my apartment filled with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the faint trace of vanilla candles. I woke every morning to the sound of my cat, Chester, padding across the hardwood floor, rubbing against my legs. Breakfasts were quiet. Toast, eggs, a drizzle of hot sauce, and I'd sip my coffee while checking emails, the hum of the laptop filling the room. I had friends, yes, and family close by, but life had a rhythm, safe, predictable, and comforting. And then Mia walked back into it, bruised and afraid, and everything shifted. Mia's life had always been different. She married young, full of hope, her dreams tangled in a man who promised the world but delivered storms. Jordan was charming at first, the kind of man who could make a room lean in when he spoke. But charm can be a mask, and behind it, his anger festered like a wound untreated. I remember the small signs she'd tried to hide in texts, in offhand mentions during phone calls. He got upset today. I think I overcooked dinner. I didn't want to bother you. At the time, I thought it was just stress, marital stress. I never imagined the bruises, the fear, the quiet terror that had become her everyday companion. Now, as she sat across from me, wrapped in my blanket like a fragile bird, I could see the full picture. Her hands trembled as she stirred her tea. Her gaze kept flicking to the window, half expecting him to appear. My twin sister, the person I had shared everything with, the one whose laughter once echoed in our shared bedroom, was trapped in a cage made of promises broken and fists raised. And I knew, with a clarity that shook me to my core, that I couldn't just comfort her. Comfort wouldn't be enough. Something had to change. Listen, I said finally, voice low but steady. We're going to fix this. Not with shouting, not with the cops first, though we will if we have to. But I'm going back there. You won't have to go through it again. I promise. Her eyes widened. Fear. Relief. Both. I couldn't tell. You what? She stammered. You can't do that, I can, I said, cutting her off gently. Because I'm not afraid of him. And you need to see that someone loves you enough to fight for you. Mia didn't respond. She just buried her face in her hands, letting the tears fall silently. And in that silence, I made a promise to both of us. No more hiding. No more running. No more fear. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, Chester curled in my lap, staring at the wall. I thought about Jordan, about how he thought control was strength, how he thought fear was power. And I let my mind drift over the plan. Subtle, clever, just enough to make him realize the damage he'd done. I would walk into his world wearing her face. Not literally, of course. We weren't identical in a way that fools strangers. But the energy, the defiance, the refusal to cower, that was mine to wield. The next few days would be delicate, tense, dangerous even. But I didn't care. For Mia, I would do it all. Because sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it strikes quietly, like the hand of a twin sister who refuses to watch another day of suffering. And in the quiet of that night, as the city outside hummed softly, I knew the first move had already been made. The following morning, Mia barely stirred. She slept curled into the sofa, her hair spilling over the cushions like spilled ink. I didn't wake her. I just brewed coffee, the smell thick and warm in the kitchen, and set out a plate of toast with peanut butter. The way she liked it, just enough crunch, not too much mess. It felt strange, feeding someone else as though I could somehow replace the life she had lost to fear. When she finally sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, I noticed the way she flinched at every little sound. The creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, even the soft meow of Chester demanding attention. That flinch wasn't just from bruises. It was from years of being told she wasn't enough, that her body, her words, her mistakes were punishable. Morning, I said softly, sitting across from her. Sleep okay? She nodded, hesitating, as though she needed permission to be honest. I guess. I didn't hear him at all. Not that it matters. I knew it did matter. Every tiny detail mattered. Every hidden mark, every whispered excuse. I'd spent my life noticing the little things about Mia, and I wasn't about to stop now. We ate in near silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery. And as I watched her, I noticed the way her hands shook slightly when she reached for her tea, the tightness in her shoulders as if bracing against an invisible weight. Listen, I said finally, leaning in. I need to know everything. Tell me about him. Tell me about the past, everything. Her eyes filled, but she didn't speak right away. She looked at the window, at the passing cars, as though counting the seconds to find courage. Then she whispered, almost inaudible. He's dangerous when he's angry. Not like yelling. Worse. I didn't need more detail. I knew all I needed. Jordan wasn't just cruel. He was violent, unpredictable. And he had built a cage around her life that she had been trying to survive. That day we made plans. We talked about the practical things first. Changing her passwords, collecting documents, contacting a lawyer if necessary. But the deeper conversation, the one we didn't speak out loud, hovered between us. The plan for me to step in. To face him. By midweek, I had familiarized myself with the rhythms of her life. Jordan's patterns weren't hard to spot. He left the house at nearly the same time every morning, returned late at night, his moods swinging like a pendulum. I learned the small things he liked, the way he drank his coffee black, the way he yelled at the dog when it barked too much, the clipped tone he used when he thought he was being clever. It was uncomfortable, stepping into her life so intimately, walking her halls, touching her things. Yet I did it with care, leaving nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. I wanted him to feel the shift, subtle but undeniable, that something had changed. One evening, as I prepared dinner in her kitchen, I noticed the first real clue that confirmed what I already suspected. The living room phone rang, and when Jordan picked up, his voice was sharp, demanding. I could hear Mia in the background, a soft apology, her voice trembling. Then came the slap, quick, sudden, almost muffled. I froze. My hand hovered over the knife I was using to chop vegetables, the rhythm of the cutting forgotten. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. This was control. And it was happening right now, with Mia helpless on the other end of the line. I set the knife down, heart hammering. This was no longer just about helping her escape. This was about showing him that fear had limits. That someone cared enough to intervene, someone who wouldn't bow, someone he couldn't intimidate. I didn't tell Mia I had heard it. I waited until she came in, exhausted, the color drained from her face. She avoided my eyes, set the tea kettle down with a shaking hand, and whispered, "He's worse than I thought." "You're safe here," I said, voice firm. "I promise. But I need to know every detail. No holding back." She hesitated. Then she spoke, words spilling like the last drops of a bottle left open too long. It started small, pushing, shoving, the occasional slap. I thought I could handle it. That it was my fault. I wasn't, her voice broke. I wasn't strong enough. I didn't know how to stop it. I felt a chill, realizing how long she had suffered in silence. Years of smiles, excuses, and hiding, all to maintain a facade that the world, or maybe even herself, could believe. That night I made a decision. No more half measures. No more waiting for him to make a mistake. I would step into her life, into his territory, and force the world, and him, to reckon with the consequences of his cruelty. The first clue, the subtle tension in the air, was Jordan's assumption that Mia would stay silent, that she would continue to endure. He didn't know I was watching, learning, cataloging his patterns, the inflections in his voice, the ways he tried to intimidate without leaving a trace. I started small. Phone calls disguised in Mia's voice, small manipulations to see how he reacted. His arrogance was his weakness. He never suspected that his carefully constructed control was fragile, that it could be undermined by someone who cared enough to understand every crevice of his tyranny. Even these small interactions left me drained, heart racing, palms slick with sweat. But it felt necessary. Every step, every observation, every whispered detail he didn't know I had collected, brought me closer to the moment when Mia could finally be free. By the end of that week, I knew his schedule, his triggers, the precise moments when he thought he had power over her. And I realized that I was ready. Ready to swap places in every meaningful way. To take her fears, her courage, and turn them into action. And as I stood in the dim light of her living room that Friday night, the city humming outside the windows, I whispered to myself, tomorrow, he's going to learn something he'll never forget. I had rehearsed the small deceptions like a quiet prayer. Phrases Mia would use, the way she softened a sentence when she wanted to avoid conflict, the little laugh she used to deflect. It felt strange to shape her voice into mine, to walk into his den of control wearing the cadence of the woman who'd been hiding for years. But practice steadied me. It made me less afraid. The Saturday I chose, the sky had that flat, hard light like it was listening. I dressed in one of Mia's sweaters, worn at the collar, faint perfume clinging to the fabric, and I pinned my hair the way she did when she wanted to look casual. I didn't want to be flashy. I wanted to be familiar. I wanted him to feel the illusion of normal until the moment it shattered. Jordan opened the door before I'd knocked, like he owned the morning. Up close, he smelled of cheap aftershave and stale cigarettes. His smile was practiced. His jaw had that predatory set that shows itself in men who believe fear funds respect. "Mia," he said, stepping aside. "You're home early." My chest tightened at being called by her name, but I kept my voice low, the soft soprano he expected. "Yeah, needed a break," I said, walking in as if I belonged. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Coffee mugs on the counter, a stack of unpaid bills by the phone, a vacuum leaning against the wall as if it had been abandoned mid-task. He followed me into the kitchen, frowning at the lack of noise, at the way the morning felt too calm. "You look tired." "You too," I said, and offered him a smile like a white flag. "Why don't you sit? I'll make us coffee." He sat at the table like a man auditing his empire. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Who else was in the room? What could be used? What could be hidden? Then, suddenly, with the casualness of a man claiming a point in an argument, he said, "You're always taking his side, aren't you?" And the pronoun he meant was me. I felt something coil in my chest. "Who's taking whose side?" I asked, deliberately naive. Jordan's lips thinned. "You know what I mean. You and your big sister act like you're better than me. Like you have to lecture me." He tapped the table. "People who leave, well, they need to learn." He might have meant it as a joke, a test. I didn't smile. I let the silence stretch, let it unnerve him in a way he wasn't used to. "You talk a lot about consequences," I said softly. "About learning lessons." I reached for the sugar bowl, my hand steady. I wonder how you'd feel if someone you loved was hurt because of one of your lessons. His face slackened for a split second, vulnerability flickering and gone. Then he laughed, thin, sharp. You're being dramatic. This is why Mia worries. That was my opening. I stood, set the cup down with more force than necessary, and looked him in the eye. I'm not here to argue. I am here to tell you to stop. To tell you that if you ever raise your hand against her again, there will be consequences you can't imagine. It was a bluff, mostly. A rope thrown into a churning river. I watched him, cataloging his reaction. The slight narrowing of his pupils, the way his fists clenched under the table. He was cornered and angry, the worst combination. I don't like being told what to do in my house, he snapped. Who are you two? Her sister, I said. And someone who will not look away. The room grew tight. The air seemed to pulse with the memory of the slap I'd heard over the phone. Jordan stood up, towering over me, and for the first time I saw the man no one liked to name. He raised his hand, slow, deliberate, with the intent of scaring me into silence. I felt the old reflex in me. The one that knew how to duck and take the brunt. But instead I did something I had not planned for. I moved, not into fear, but into his space. I stepped forward so his hand had to pass me to reach the chair behind. His palm met my shoulder instead of my face. The contact was electric. Not damaging, but it carried the heat of a man used to obedience. I didn't pull away. I met his eyes and held them like a mirror. You think that hurts me? I asked, quiet but clear. It doesn't. It only tells me there's a man who fears losing control. For a beat, he hesitated. Maybe he was measuring me up against the Mia he knew. Maybe he was shocked that the woman in front of him wouldn't fold. Then he laughed again, shorter now, forced. You're not her, he said. No, I said. I'm not. I kept my voice soft, because softness can be a weapon when it's calm and controlled. But I'm someone who loves her. Someone who won't let this continue. The first crack came not from me, but from something in his apartment. An envelope slid from the coffee table, as if nudged by fate. Bills, receipts, and then a photograph. He snagged it up before I could see, but my eyes caught the edge of something else. An email printout with his signature on a document I didn't fully understand. Papers that suggested he had been tightening every financial and legal leash around Mia's life. His face blanched when he realized what had fallen. I realized then that his cruelty had more than one face. It wasn't only physical. It was also control by leverage, by debt, by paperwork, by ensuring she had nowhere to go that was truly free. You kept her finances, I said slowly. You made sure she couldn't leave. You don't understand, he snapped. She's reckless. She needs guidance. What you call guidance is possession, I said. You built a prison, and I'm done pretending the bars are invisible. His anger shifted then, less bluster, more calculation. He reached for his keys, meaning to assert himself with absence. Get out of my house before I call the police, he said. I smiled then, the kind of smile that was used to bending steel. Call them, I said. Call anyone. Tell them you had a visitor who didn't know her place. Tell them whatever you need to make yourself sleep at night. He did call, angry, ridiculous, spitting words like bullets. I listened as he lied about an intruder, about a woman who was mad, about a twin who was a troublemaker. I stayed calm, answered questions when asked, but I also watched him reveal himself. The little slips of truth that come out when someone thinks they're convincing others. When the police arrived, 2 officers who looked at us with that professional pity, I told them in Mia's voice the abbreviated truth. We'd had an argument. I'd come here to calm things. He was calling because he was scared. I made sure they saw the photograph resting on the table, the receipts, the papers. I watched Jordan's face when they asked if anyone was injured. I'm fine, I said, pulling on the sweater sleeve where the bruise under her collarbone had once been. I let them see the trembling in my hands. It was a careful performance, but also not a lie. The officers left with a caution, a promise to check in, and Jordan with his chest puffed up, believing he'd scored. But I had seen the paper trail. I had seen the means he used to keep her tethered. And more importantly, I had seen his reactions. How he faltered in the face of someone who refused to be small. That night, after he'd gone to work and the apartment settled into a fragile quiet, I sat with Mia's documents spread out on the table and felt the gravity of what I'd uncovered. He hadn't only hurt her that week. He had been slowly suffocating her life. Bank statements redirected. A lease with his name on it. Emails that showed he'd been slowly removing her autonomy. Betrayal, I realized, is not always a single punch. Sometimes it's 1,000 small cuts hidden in mail and law and language. And the discovery of them stung like salt. I called Mia and, for the first time, spoke plainly. You did the right thing, I told her. He won't have it all. Her voice was raw, trembling. What did you do? She asked. Enough, I said. For now. But we need more than promises. And in the quiet that followed, I felt the moment of rupture. The point where the private cruelty met the public truth. The real, dangerous work was only beginning. The next morning, I woke early, heart still thrumming from the tension of the day before. Mia was still asleep, curled on the sofa, her chest rising and falling with a kind of fragile peace I hadn't seen in years. I brewed coffee, letting the bitter aroma fill the apartment like armor. Today was about planning, not confrontation, but strategy. We needed a path forward that was clever, deliberate, and safe. I had spent the night thinking about Jordan, his weaknesses, his need to dominate, his obsession with control. Every step he had taken to suppress Mia had left traces, little cracks in the facade. And I knew how to exploit them without resorting to violence, without putting Mia in harm's way. When she finally stirred, I laid out the plan. We're going to swap, in a way, I told her. Not literally, but enough that he thinks he's dealing with you, and I think he's dealing with me. It's going to unsettle him. Mia blinked, confused. You can't. He'll know it's you. I don't need him to know immediately, I said. I just need him to realize that he no longer has control. That fear is not something I will let him wield against you. She hesitated, biting her lip. I could see the internal struggle, the mixture of hope, fear, and relief. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. But be careful. I spent the next 2 days in careful preparation. I memorized her phrases, the inflections in her voice when she wanted to soften a request, the quirks that made Jordan think he knew her completely. I learned the routes he took to work, the times he usually left for errands, even the small cafe he stopped at for black coffee every morning. The plan wasn't reckless, it was calculated. And the more I observed, the more cracks I saw in his control. It was on Wednesday evening that the real confrontation began. Jordan arrived home late, more irritated than usual. Work had apparently gone wrong, his coffee machine had broken, and he had left the house with his anger simmering. He didn't notice anything at first, just the quiet calm of the apartment, the faint aroma of dinner cooking, and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Hey, I said, stepping from the kitchen into the living room, keeping Mia's soft tone. How was work? He froze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Suspicion, confusion, perhaps the first twinge of fear. What are you doing home? He asked, voice clipped. Needed a break, I replied casually. I thought I'd make some dinner. He didn't sit. He leaned against the doorway, chest tight, jaw set. You're acting different. Am I? I asked, stepping closer. Or are you just noticing things you didn't want to see before? Jordan's brow furrowed, the tension between us thickening. He reached for the coffee table, fingers brushing against the envelopes and receipts I had strategically left in place the day before. His eyes flicked to the scattered documents. What's all this? He demanded. I smiled faintly. Oh, just some things I found while getting organized. Things that show how much you care, or how little. He laughed, sharp and brittle. You don't know what you're talking about. I do, I said, calm, steady. And so does anyone who looks closely. Control isn't love, Jordan. It's a cage. And you've built a prison around Mia. For a long moment, he said nothing. His fists clenched, unclenched. He looked like a man trying to decide whether to explode or flee. Then, in a sudden burst, he grabbed a coffee mug and threw it against the wall. The ceramic shattered, the sound sharp and final, and I realized he had underestimated me. He thought fear would bend me the way it had bent Mia. But it didn't. I stepped forward. Enough, I said, voice quiet but cutting through the tension like steel. No more hiding, no more hitting, no more lies. Not with me here. Not now. He froze again, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. He had expected submission, trembling, excuses. He hadn't expected confrontation, or clarity, or someone standing for Mia with her energy, her courage magnified. You think this changes anything? He said finally, voice low, dangerous. It does, I replied. Because you can't scare me. And if you try, the world will see you for what you are. I'm telling you, stop or face consequences beyond your imagination. He swallowed hard, a man realizing that the balance of power had shifted. He tried to speak, tried to yell, tried to reclaim control. But I watched him falter, small cracks appearing in the armor of his bravado. That night, after he left for an errand, likely to blow off steam, I went through every document, every email, every small trace of manipulation he had used to trap Mia. I prepared for what needed to be public. Receipts for bills he had redirected, emails showing his insistence on secrecy, notes proving his control over her daily life. The plan was unfolding perfectly. Jordan had no idea the subtle trap had been laid. By the time his friends, colleagues, or neighbors noticed the small inconsistencies, calls he couldn't fully explain, accounts that didn't match his stories, the consequences would be inevitable. And I knew deep in my chest that the final confrontation was coming. The moment when Mia's fear would be fully replaced with freedom, and Jordan's control would crumble under the weight of truth. As I sat alone, the faint hum of the city outside the apartment window, I realized something profound. This wasn't about revenge or cruelty or one-upping him. It was about justice, about reclaiming a life stolen quietly, piece by piece. And for the first time in years, I felt something light inside me. Hope. Hope that Mia would be safe. Hope that the man who had cast shadows over her life would finally understand the cost of his actions. Hope that I had been enough. Tomorrow, I knew the public reckoning would begin. And when it did, there would be no turning back. The next morning, I woke before the sun, the apartment quiet except for Chester padding across the floor, curling around my ankles. I had a plan now, clear and deliberate, one that would ensure Jordan faced consequences without ever laying a hand on him, or on Mia. But executing it required patience, subtlety, and nerves like steel. I called Mia first, keeping my voice gentle but purposeful. "Are you ready?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "I trust you." That was all I needed. I spent the morning moving through the motions of her life, just as she would, answering phone calls in her soft tone, sipping coffee at the table as if nothing was amiss, keeping my gestures unremarkable. Jordan would notice nothing out of place, at least, not yet. That was the beauty of the plan. By noon, he returned home from errands. The usual clatter of keys, the brief scent of cigarettes and cheap cologne. He didn't notice me immediately, absorbed as he was in his own grievances. I let him stew, let the tension build quietly, and when he finally did look, I maintained my calm, gentle smile. "Mia," he said, like a greeting meant to assert dominance. "You're home again. You didn't expect me to be organized?" I said lightly, letting the phrase hang. A small pause. Then I added, "Or capable of noticing things?" The confusion in his eyes was immediate. Something about my tone, the subtle authority I carried. He hadn't expected confrontation wrapped in familiarity. What do you mean?" he asked, voice tight. "Oh, nothing major," I said, pouring a cup of coffee. "Just the bills. The mail. Things you've ignored." His expression tightened. The first cracks were appearing, and I moved carefully, deliberately. "Jordan," I said, voice soft but firm. "I think you've forgotten something important. You can't control her forever. You can't erase what you've done, and you can't hide it from the people who matter." He laughed, a bark of incredulity. "Control? Hide? You're imagining things." I shook my head slowly, as if pitying him. "No, Jordan. I've seen it all. Every step you've taken to cage her, to scare her, to keep her from living freely. I have the evidence, and I'm ready to share it." He froze, the first genuine flicker of fear in his eyes. But then he squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest, trying to regain dominance. "You don't scare me," he said. I leaned closer, soft and calm. "No, I don't scare. But I do insist on truth. And I insist on consequences." For a moment, I thought he would erupt, that he would yell, throw something, strike. But he didn't. Instead, he studied me, calculating, realizing that the person standing in front of him, the calm, deliberate, unshakable woman, was not the Mia he had tormented. I let the silence stretch, knowing that this was worse for him than any shouting or confrontation. Anger can be met with anger. Fear, when denied, creates something far more dangerous, doubt. "You think I'll let you get away with this?" He finally spat, voice low and venomous. "I'm not letting you get away with anything," I said. "Mia's life isn't yours to ruin. It hasn't been for years, and it won't be anymore. You're done." He tried to argue, tried to manipulate, tried to gaslight me into silence. I let him speak, letting each word hang in the air until it lost its power. Then, when he faltered for the briefest moment, I delivered the final layer of the plan, the subtle unveiling. I set the photograph and papers from the table where he could see them. Receipts, emails, bills. All of it proof of control, proof of manipulation, proof that the world could see his cruelty. He lunged for them, but I caught the edge of the papers first. "Stop," I said. "This isn't about fighting. This is about truth. And everyone who needs to know will know. Your friends, your colleagues, the authorities. No more hiding." The shift was immediate. Jordan's jaw went slack. The confidence he carried, the illusion of control, faltered in real time. He could still yell, still attempt intimidation, but the armor of certainty had cracked. The facade was gone. "You," he started, but no words came out. He realized he was exposed, and exposure is a powerful weapon. By evening, the subtle consequences had begun to ripple. A neighbor, who had seen the tension, asked questions. A coworker noticed inconsistencies in his story. The email trail and receipts were quietly corroborated. Jordan had no idea that each small move he thought he controlled was being documented, prepared, and revealed piece by piece. I left him that night with a simple phrase. "Think about this. Not for me. Not for Mia. For yourself. The choices you've made have consequences." And I meant it. Not as a threat, not as revenge, but as truth. The kind of truth that cannot be hidden, the kind that forces reflection, accountability, and, ultimately, change. When he returned to his empty apartment the next day, no one called, no one cheered. The city outside hummed normally, the neighbors unaware of the quiet reckoning inside that little apartment. But he knew. That was enough. The realization that his power was gone, that someone had dared to stand in the place of fear, was a lesson he would carry forever. Back at my apartment, I called Mia. "It's done," I said. Her voice broke into a laugh, shaky but real. "I can't believe it. You really did it." "I didn't do it for me," I said. "I did it for you. And for the life you deserve." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you. I feel like I can breathe again." That's when I knew the first real victory had been won. Not with anger or cruelty or shouting, but with calm, with strategy, with love made visible in action. Jordan would face more consequences in the days ahead. He would answer questions, confront exposure, and reckon with the truth. But for now, Mia was free. And that, I realized, was worth everything. Word travels in small towns the way wind carries seed. Quiet at first, then all at once. Ours wasn't a tiny town, but the apartment courtyard, the corner coffee shop, the yoga studio. Those were our circles. And once the truth slips through one crack, it finds every seam. Within days, people who'd never spoken up began to ask. Jordan's friend Mark dropped by the cafe where he worked and asked why Jordan hadn't shown up for a shift. A neighbor who used to nod politely stopped replying to his texts. Someone in his office forwarded an email with a receipt attached and a quiet question. "You aware of this?" It wasn't dramatic. No viral posts, no shouting into the void, but it was effective. People began to treat him as someone with edges now visible, not the smooth, charming man he'd cultivated. The police made a courtesy check after a neighbor's call. I answered each question in steady tones and in Mia's measured voice. What happened, when, why? I showed them the receipts, the lease, the emails. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't embellish. I let the documents speak. And documents, unlike memories or promises, have weight. At work, Jordan attempted to keep the narrative tight. Stillness is a strategy for some men, but colleagues whisper. One coworker, an older woman who'd always met him in the break room, caught my eye in the hallway and mouthed, "Are you okay?" She later told me she'd suspected something for months. Her quiet corroboration opened a door that a single accusation rarely could. The social consequence was subtle but thorough. Invitations he once took for granted stopped coming. A birthday barbecue had an RSVP list that suddenly excluded him. The people who'd laughed at his jokes discovered they had no patience for suspicion. It was not instant justice. That's not how real life works. But it was honest and it stung in its own way. Ostracism. The slow erosion of the networks that once buffered him. Jordan felt it. The first time he called Mia after everything began to come out, his voice was small, and there was a hesitation in his laugh. He tried to blame stress. He tried to say it was all a misunderstanding. He asked for a meeting with mutual friends, and even attempted a clumsy apology that sounded rehearsed. People watched him try to perform contrition and saw the seams. They asked questions he couldn't answer without betraying the pattern everyone now suspected. What surprised me and steadied me was the small kindnesses that arrived for Mia. A woman from the building offered to store some of her things. The receptionist at her doctor's office made a private note and called her to ensure she had support. A cousin she hadn't talked to in years sent a message. "You don't have to do this alone." Those gestures were not fireworks. They were stitches for a wound that had been left to fester too long. Legally, things moved slowly, as they always do. We filed statements, sought counsel, and prepared for the possibility of formal action. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted stability for Mia. Proof that she could hold a life in her own hands. The law is a blunt instrument. People are complicated. So we balanced paperwork with people. Witnesses, friends. The neighbor who'd seen Jordan's temper flare one night and agreed to sign a statement. Jordan, confronted with both social isolation and the concrete paper trail, became quieter in public. He was no longer the loud center of a small orbit. He was a man measuring his steps, changing the tone of his voice, rehearsing apologies that felt thin. Pride is stubborn, and sometimes it refuses to bend until everything else cracks. But seeing him shrink, knowing it was because the community chose to protect one of its own, that felt like a small, righteous victory. Through it all, Mia began to reclaim rhythm. She walked in the park during daylight, her shoulders less hunched. She started sleeping through the night more often. We went to the bank together and untangled the accounts he'd knotted into a web. Each small administrative victory felt huge. A key changed here, a signature added there. The public consequences were not about humiliation. They were about accountability and the rebuilding that follows when a community refuses to look away. When I sat with Mia on a Sunday afternoon and watched her laugh, real sudden, a sound that belonged in our childhood memories, I knew the world had tilted a little closer to right. It wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was honest, and honesty had a way of healing the small fractures. After the storm, there was a quiet that felt almost sacred. Mia and I spent hours in her apartment, organizing, unpacking, and rebuilding routines that had been fractured under years of fear. The bruises on her arms had faded, but the deeper marks, the ones fear leaves on your chest and your voice, needed more time. And in that time, I learned something about both of us. Survival is not just about endurance, but about reclaiming space, one small act at a time. We started with the little things. Morning coffee on the balcony, letting sunlight spill across the floorboards. Grocery shopping without his oversight. Laughing about minor mistakes like buying the wrong bread or spilling juice in the cart. Dinner preparation became a ceremony rather than a chore. Each ordinary act was a declaration of autonomy, a quiet rebellion against a past that had tried to cage her. Mia began to sleep better. She started waking without the tension in her shoulders, without the instinct to flinch at the sound of a car door or a raised voice. She even started talking about things she'd shelved for years. Hobbies, plans, dreams. She wanted to take a painting class, start volunteering at the community center, maybe even adopt a dog. Every time she spoke about these things, I felt a surge of quiet pride. I watched her reclaim herself in ways that were subtle but profound. One evening, she laughed so freely over a story about her childhood misadventures that I almost forgot the weight she had carried. We sat on the couch, windows open, the scent of jasmine from the garden wafting inside, and I realized that this calm, ordinary life was the true victory. Not revenge, not confrontation, just freedom. We also had conversations about forgiveness. Not for Jordan, not yet, perhaps never, but for Mia herself. She had carried blame for too long, blaming herself for staying, for trying, for enduring. I thought I was weak, she admitted one afternoon, but I see now I was just surviving. Yes, I said, my hand resting over hers. Surviving is brave, but now you can thrive, and you don't have to do it alone. Together, we untangled the threads Jordan had knotted around her life. Finances, paperwork, contacts. Each completed task was a stone laid back into place, a step toward reclaiming agency. I taught her how to read the contracts, how to monitor the accounts, how to say no without guilt. It was empowering in a way I hadn't expected, watching her confidence bloom like sunlight through clouds. Even Jordan's absence became a lesson in resilience. Without the constant shadow of fear, Mia realized how much space she had lost. The silence was no longer intimidating, it was hers. And for the first time in years, she felt capable of living without anticipating threats. Outside our small circle, the community's quiet support persisted. Friends checked in, neighbors smiled more warmly, and small kindnesses became abundant. Someone dropped off muffins, another lent a book she'd wanted to read. Those gestures weren't dramatic, but they reinforced what Mia had begun to understand. She was not alone, and the world could be a source of safety and nurture, not just fear. There were days when she would pause, look out the window, and sigh. "It's strange," she said once, "not to be afraid." I smiled. "It's new. It feels unfamiliar. But it's yours." We also talked about lessons learned. Never stay silent when someone's hurting you. I told her one evening, the city lights twinkling like stars through the window. And never underestimate the power of someone who loves you enough to intervene. Her eyes met mine, shimmering. "You did that for me," she whispered. "I did," I said. "But more importantly, you let me. You trusted me with your life. That's a strength too." And in the long nights that followed, we began to dream again. Vacations, small trips, weekends at the lake. We spoke about friends we'd lost touch with, and the ones we wanted to cultivate. Each choice, each plan, was a thread weaving a new tapestry of life. One not dictated by fear, but by intention, hope, and resilience. By the end of the month, I realized that healing is a process, not a single event. Bruises fade, doors unlock, documents are filed, and lives are reclaimed. But the deeper lessons, the lessons of courage, love, and moral clarity linger. And they are what make a person truly free. Mia and I often sit together in the evenings now, just talking, just listening. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. But always we are safe. Always we are together. And in that togetherness, I feel the deepest kind of peace. The peace of knowing that fear no longer dictates our lives. As I sit here, telling you this story, I think about how life can twist and turn in ways we never expect. Fear can be quiet, creeping into homes, into hearts, into daily routines until it becomes invisible. But love, real love, can be loud in its own way. It shows up. It notices. It acts. Mia is free now. Not because of luck, not because of chance, but because someone cared enough to stand in the place of fear and insist on justice. The bruises healed, the papers were sorted, the social consequences fell into place. But most importantly, she reclaimed her life. Every small decision, every step toward independence was a triumph. And watching her grow, laugh, and dream again reminded me of something I want everyone listening to remember. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. We all have choices about when to step in, when to speak up, and when to protect the people we love. I didn't do anything heroic. I just refused to look away. And sometimes, refusing to look away is the most powerful action of all. So I want to ask you, those of you listening, watching, thinking, what would you do if someone you loved was trapped in fear? Could you stand in their place, even for a moment, to protect them? Mia's life is different now, brighter, ordinary, yet extraordinary in its freedom. And mine has changed too, because I learned that love isn't quiet. Love acts, love protects, and love demands justice. If this story moved you, or made you think about courage, protection, or the quiet power of love, please subscribe, share, and tell someone you care about that you see them. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments.